Welcome to Critical Role Demystified. I'm Mike Christensen, and this is the series where we break down the lessons we can learn, as GMs and as players, from episodes of Critical Role. Today we're tackling episode 37, A Musician's Nostalgia. As a reminder, I normally release new episodes every other week, but if we can get to 1,000 patrons, I'll take this series weekly. It's a new year in the game, it's 2016, and this is the first episode with the walls behind the players, so there's no Geek and Sundry background, it's just a D&D appropriate backdrop. Ashley is also able to join them for this episode, since filming for Blind Spot hadn't started back up yet. As the episode opens, the party prepares to go back home to Amon, and they're trying to gather enough evidence to clear their names when they get there. This goal is complicated by the fact that they don't fully remember what they've done in the last few sessions. They know what they want to do, but don't remember what they've tried to do. For example, they sort of accidentally retroactively established that Allura is on her way to examine the spinning black orb of death, which I don't think was confirmed in the last episode.
Isn't Allura, on her way here? Aren't a lot of people, on their way here?
Yeah, where's
I'm
Allura?
so confused.
That's true, wasn't Allura on her way?
What happened in 2015? Just the whole way through. Start from the beginning.
It's been a year.
And here's the lesson. It's okay to forget things. It happens. The entire cast basically has a brain fart at the beginning of this episode, and I don't think their memories are helped by the fact that a lot of the things they wanted to do were resolved by Matt, but in the form of a montage during their Winter's Crest episode. They didn't roleplay all of these interactions and efforts. That's sort of the downside of a downtime session like the one we saw in the last episode, is that it's possible some of the results might not stick in the minds of players. But to be honest, your players can forget things that happen for lots of reasons. Chief among them being that they're normal human people, and they have their own stuff going on. So just be patient, and especially in a situation like this one, if the players say that there's something that they wanted to do, but they can't remember whether or not they did it in the previous session, honestly, just side with the players and make it so that they did do what they wanted to do. Especially in a situation like this one, where the characters would absolutely have had the time to make that happen. They had 2 weeks in Whitestone. They would have figured out who in Whitestone could write letters to send to Amon to help prove Vox Machina's innocence. Anyway, they eventually get their ducks in a row and prepare to travel through the Sun Tree and head back to Amon. Along the way, Keyleth talks to the tree, and Matt does a little bit of yes-anding.
You approach the Sun Tree, and Keyleth, you step forward,
And I say, hey, boo, I'll see you soon.
the tree silently fist bump you through its arcane.
You be good. You take care of you, man.
You hear a voice whisper in the back of your mind, "You too, girl." As you reach out,
You're the best tree of all time.
Tolkien would be proud, man.
I think so.
I only mention it because soon we are going to get a Sun Tree character voice, but these super casual interactions are laying the groundwork for what that character will become. They arrive at Grayskull Keep and find Pike waiting for them. She's not in Vasselheim, she's back in Amon. Matt hereby retcons that by the time she learned what was happening in Whitestone, she was already worried. She'd been having visions, so she was already on her way back to Amon. But she got here after Vox Machina had left for Whitestone. So this is where she was astrally projecting from for the past few sessions. It's very much a hand wave, but also, who cares? Ashley is here, and it would be very strange to describe her astrally projecting in for this, since they're not fighting for their lives. So she's just here, and it's fine. And then they hear a metal clanging from Tiberius' workshop. They discover Tiberius is there, packing his things. If you hadn't guessed, in this scene, Tiberius is played by Matt, and it is here that Matt offers a narrative explanation for why Tiberius won't continue to adventure with them. And we're going to talk about this scene in some detail, but I should say, I strongly recommend you watch this full scene. The timecode is on screen and in the description. I'm going to include the clips that are relevant to this discussion, but the full scene is excellent. Everyone I know who has watched this episode, even if they didn't care for Tiberius or the player who played him, have always really enjoyed this scene. And not because of some sort of schadenfreude, but because it's just a really lovely moment. We're not getting back into the drama around Tiberius' player. There's honestly nothing more to say on that subject. But there can be any number of reasons why you might have to write out a character when the player is no longer part of the campaign. We've talked before about the ways you can do this to give closure to a character when you know they're going to have to step away from the campaign, but what if you didn't have that warning? I've had to do this before. I've had a player leave a campaign pretty quickly because he realized just the tone of the game wasn't the right style for him. And because he left in maybe not the most diplomatic of ways, basically over a text message, I have to admit that the way I wrote out the character was also kind of flippant. His ranger just ran off on his own with the bad guy the party was holding hostage, kidnapped the bad guy, not running away with him in a romantic way. He took the hostage and left with the hostage. The bad guy was tied up in his backstory, so it made the most sense that once the ranger was face to face with that villain, he would focus on his own goals. After all, that was kind of what led to the behavior that put him in friction with the rest of the group. He was really too focused on his own goals. And then at the end of the campaign, I had the villain return, and I pretty much confirmed that he had killed off the ranger off screen. But Tiberius was part of the Vox Machina campaign for a lot longer than our player was part of ours, and so simply having him leave a note and then vanish would not be very satisfying. So Tiberius is in his laboratory, packing up his gear, and the moment the party arrives just happens to be when he's just about finished packing. And he gets a chance to say goodbye.
Greetings and salutations. I'd hoped I'd see you before heading out.
Heading out?
Heading what?
I've spent a few weeks in Draconia and trying to secure aid for us in Whitestone.
Are you from Draconia?
Indeed, I am.
The first thing that makes this scene work is that, honestly, Matt's Tiberius impression is just excellent. It's not just that he's doing a voice, although that helps. It's also the fact that he's channeling the energy of Tiberius, and, now this is important, he's being respectful of the character.
I've had some time to think. Being here on my own for the better part of a week now, I consider you all friends and fine warriors. Mostly. And I've enjoyed our travels together. And I've learned much, and for that I thank you sincerely. However, my diplomatic mission has fallen to the wayside these recent months, and while my personal mission to recover these artifacts has grown stagnant. As proven by my time in Draconia, I have still yet to gain the respect of my family. And I feel that the path of Vox Machina and the path of Tiberius Stormwind haven't been aligned for some time.
Matt does a few really smart things here. First, he ties Tiberius' departure to his character's personal objective. It's true that Tiberius was very dissimilar from the other player characters because he had his own goals. He was trying to find a number of magic items he'd learned about in a library. But I hardly ever had to mention these items during these videos, aside from his use of the mending wheel, because that quest just wasn't a major part of the overall Vox Machina story. Now, that just happens to be the case for their campaign. There are obviously plenty of campaigns you can run where it's much more common for players to create their own goals, and it's also not hard to imagine that some of these items would have wound up being discovered as the campaign continued. But in this case, it's not difficult to make the case that, while this is not actually what happened behind the scenes, Tiberius as a character could have felt a bit disconnected from the broader goals of Vox Machina, because he actually had a very specific objective. Matt also makes sure to take a moment and recognize the good times. He has Tiberius thank them for their adventures, and says that their time together was enjoyable. Obviously, the folks at Critical Role are in a unique position. This scene is being broadcast for an audience. In your games, when a player leaves without giving you a chance to write them out in advance, it's unlikely that player will ever see the scene where you write out the character, let alone will it be broadcast to anybody outside of the group. But I still think it's wise to focus on what was good, and try to give the character the send-off that their player wasn't able to get. It can be a really wonderful form of closure.
I come up behind my sister and I take him by the hand and I say, Tiberius, your friendship was always valued here. I don't think we'd be standing here without you.
That's true.
I will never forget you.
As I shall never forget all of you.
Speaking as a man who has also had a romantic interest in ladies before, are there any romantic messages you'd like me to pass on for you or to anyone in this town or others?
You? No.
Turns to Keyleth and takes Keyleth and goes,
If you see her, tell her Laura I'm sorry. And she's always welcome to visit me in Draconia.
I will. Bye, Tipsy. And give him a hug.
Kind of flicks his wrist, and you can see a already prepared teleportation circle in the room flash with blue runes as his image, waving towards you,
Shit.
scatters into nothing. The runes die down to a cold, magicless circle.
Safe travels, Stormwind.
Well, shit.
Said the shits.
I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit and get a bit personal. There's a campaign I run that hasn't had a game since the pandemic started. Well, we did do one virtual game in 2020, but besides that, it's kind of been on an indefinite pause. I just need to sit down and plot out the last few sessions and present a satisfying end, and then ideally later this year or early next year, I want to get the players together for a few final sessions to give that story and their characters some closure. But there's some complications around that. First, one of the players moved away. We can have him join remotely, of course, but I'd really love to get the rest of the cast together in person, at least for the final session. But we also had a cast member who left the campaign in late 2020 due to some less than ideal interpersonal circumstances. And so, as the GM, I'd like to find a way to give that character closure without throwing the character under the bus just because I had a falling out with their player. But there's another wrinkle to the situation, which is that maybe less than a year after the player left the campaign, they were in an accident, and we lost them. Now, I had known that player the longest, so it was surreal and complicated. And while I've already said my goodbyes and done at least some of my grieving on my own time, I also know that whenever we get back to the table, giving their character a satisfying send-off is going to bring about some complicated emotions that I almost certainly haven't unpacked yet. But whenever I'm in doubt about how to properly honor that character, or any character whose player left the campaign and more or less exited the friend group, look, I know it sounds corny, but I think back to this scene. Because honestly, if I can handle my situation with even an ounce of the grace and respectfulness that Matt embodied when he gave Tiberius his send-off, then I think it'll be a very lovely game session. After Tiberius leaves, the remaining members of Vox Machina go to their dungeon to speak with Desmond, the coachman for the Briarwoods and their prisoner since episode 25, and ask him to come and testify to Uriel. Pike also heals his hand some more, and Vax keeps insisting they need to give him some gold. And Percy says yes, but we'll give it from the Whitestone coffers when he returns home. And Vex says, I understand you think he knows that we owe him gold. I don't have enough gold to actually give him gold. Then they go to the Cloudtop district and are brought to see Sovereign Uriel and a few members of the Taldore Council. Seeker Assume also reports back from his mission to Wildmount to dig into the history of the Briarwoods and confirms that they were apparently killed by a mob for the crime of necromancy, though obviously that was designed to throw the authorities off of their trail. Uriel is distraught and apologetic and really beating himself up for being mentally controlled by an evil entity a second time. Percy apologizes on their behalf. They acted rashly, and it made it easier for the Briarwoods to turn Uriel against them. He also tries to comfort Uriel by suggesting that these evils are attracted to Uriel's innate goodness, which is a great line, though maybe a small comfort. They hand over the evidence they found, and it confirms that, yeah, Riskel Daxio, a council member who doesn't happen to be there today, was a turncoat working for the Briarwoods. Uriel sends the guards to go find and arrest Daxio. He also mentions that Riskel's adopted, estranged father, Mikhail, is the head of forces at Fort Daxio, a very important military location. Of course, Mikhail Daxio isn't there right now. He's in the elven city of Singorn on a diplomatic mission. That's where Vex and Vax's father lives, incidentally. Also, the fact that Matt referenced Mikhail Daxio and Fort Daxio, this is what we in the business call foreshadowing. Percy also asks that they convert Grayskull Keep into an embassy for Whitestone. Scanlan convinces Uriel to give Desmond some financial recompense, so Uriel gives him 1,000 gold. Vax also announces that Percy and Vex promised to match Uriel's gold reward.
Desmond, the
Debt
debt
that I owe you is larger than coin, and
What
is
coins, huh?
and is ongoing. So if you can think of what sort of trade you would like to spend your next years of life pursuing, whether it be in
Probably not lute playing. I'm gonna just throw that out there.
Wow. Fucking
drums, it
cold.
is. Drums, it is.
Holy shit.
You are a terrible person. I'm a terrible person, but you're the worst.
The guards are unable to find Riskel Daxio. He hasn't been seen in the palace for days. So Vox Machina offers to help track him down. They go check out Daxio's room, and they notice that some of the furniture has glyphs etched into it. Some of the same glyphs they saw back in the ziggurat. And those pieces of furniture are arranged around the room in a very specific layout. The party rolls Arcana checks to figure out their significance, and Travis rolls a joke roll and gets a natural 20. Much like the last time this happened, the cast is excited to figure out how Matt is going to justify this use of the out-of-character flash of insight. Matt explains that the arrangement of symbols is just like some of the symbols they saw the last time they tried to scry on someone who didn't want to be seen. And Travis actually fills in the blank himself. Matt is apparently referencing the ziggurat where they fought the Beholder, and the time Keyleth tried to scry on him and got repelled. However, as much fun as the cast has with both times Grog has a flash of insight based on a joke roll, I don't remember this ever happening again with Grog and the rest of the Vox Machina campaign. It's possible Matt asked Travis to stop doing joke rolls, but it's also possible Travis felt guilty that his joke rolls were being rewarded, like he was getting away with something. Or maybe some folks online reminded both of them that, rules as written, a natural 20 isn't an automatic success. Or maybe because Travis enjoys playing the dumbest character in the group, he didn't necessarily enjoy these flashes of insight because they didn't line up with how he wanted to play his character. Whatever the reason, this is pretty much the last joke roll that gets legitimately rewarded, or at least the last one I can remember Travis rolling in this campaign. They also learn that Daxio's servant, Jeffrey, is currently being interrogated. Grog and Scanlan enter the interrogation room, and Grog pulls out Craven Edge and holds it at his side, because Craven Edge gives him advantage on intimidation checks. And they play some good cop, bad cop to see if Jeffrey knows anything about where Daxio went. When they press Jeffrey about places Daxio goes inside of the city, they learn that Daxio occasionally went to a lowbrow tavern in the Graveyard District, the Diamond Nest Tavern. As just a bit of fun, Grog threatens him by putting Craven Edge under his chin. But then shadows surround Grog's body, and he needs to make a wisdom saving throw to stop Craven Edge from cutting Jeffrey's throat. That seems fine, probably not a big deal. Meanwhile, Keyleth goes outside and casts Commune with Nature, which allows her to communicate with the land beneath Amon. She determines that Riskel Daxio is still in Amon. He's beneath the tavern in the Graveyard District, and that there are smugglers' tunnels that lead beneath the city to places like the tavern, and to the docks. Matt also reminds the players that the Diamond Nest Tavern is the same tavern where the party had previously encountered a sect of the Clasp, the thieves guild that popped up a lot during the pre-stream games. On the way to the tavern, Vax asks Pike to keep an eye on Grog and that spooky magic sword. When they reach the tavern, Scanlan recognizes a few members of the band on stage, including his mentor, Dr. Dranzel, because, fun fact, Scanlan's backstory is inspired by M&M's, complete with his own Dr. Dre, who apparently played a big part in Eminem's career? I don't know. Music is one of my big pop culture blind spots. Anyway, the party encourages Scanlan to join them on stage and plays in harmony, and in friendly competition, with the cute gnome girl who is also playing the flute. After the song, Dr. Dranzel and his band sit with Vox Machina, Scanlan and the gnome flutist to do a little bit more flirting, and then a young boy comes to the table and hands Dranzel a sack of gold and jewelry. Seems he was pickpocketing people through the sets, and he's part of Dranzel's crew. Although Vex had actually noticed this. During the song, Matt whispered in Laura's ear about something. This is him rewarding her for her extremely high passive perception. In previous games, she's expressed frustration when she failed a perception check, considering how high her passive perception was. So Matt is making sure to factor in her passive perception, and giving her whispers about information before she even thinks to roll for anything. This is his approach to niche protection, which we'll probably talk about a lot more in a future video. We also get this moment, and legitimately, this is maybe one of my favorite Percy and Grog exchanges, because Taliesin and Travis are just completely on the same page for this joke.
So I take it you're all, experiencing a little skullduggery from time to time, yes?
Grog, that doesn't mean what you think it means.
Oh.
Dranzel gives Vox Machina a tip about a house they've learned about, one of those houses owned by a rich dickhead with too much money, so much that he really needs some help getting rid of some of it. Wink. Dranzel doesn't have any information on whose house this is, but they know that the owner hasn't even been home in ages, but there's a ton of wealth inside. And Vox Machina realizes they know this house. They killed the previous owner of this house. The previous owner of this house was a blue dragon in disguise. But Dranzel says some folks have been burgling the house recently and have come out with some loot, so there is still a way to get to some of the gold in what used to be General Krieg's house, and maybe even Brimscythe's hoard. Keyleth and Vax are really on the fence about this mission. They really feel like Dranzel is still holding something back, but they pretty much leave the topic here because Vox Machina still has a job to do. Vax and Vex confirm with the bartender that Daxio is hidden somewhere below the bar. They learn that there is a passage hidden underneath some barrels in the storage room. Scanlan arranges to be the distraction by challenging Kaylie, the gnomish girl, to a flute-off, a dueling flute battle. The terms: if Scanlan loses, he hands over his coin purse. If Scanlan wins, he gets a kiss from Kaylie. Meanwhile, the rest of the party tries to sneak through the kitchen, but it's a disaster. Vex tries to bring her bear, and Pike's armor is loud as hell. Matt ends up hand-waving and declaring that this is a group check partway through, just because they're getting totally stalled. This is really a moment where the story can't move forward if the party fails their stealth checks, at least with their current plan. And ideally you don't want to pull this move in your own games, but the alternative would be that Pike just sits out for the rest of the session, or that the party is forced to come up with another plan, which is normally what would happen in a Critical Role game. This is just the exception. Meanwhile, Scanlan crushes his flute battle, but at the last moment, he decides to let her win. Then he starts to hand over a little bit of gold, but not everything he has. But Dranzel and Kaylie remind him he did bet his entire purse. So reluctantly, he hands it over. His purse contained 2,600 gold, by the way. But there's a promise of future flirtation with Kaylie, maybe even a date at some point. Scanlan turns invisible and follows the party into the basement. They come to a door with 5 locks, and next to each there is a word scratched into the wall in a different language. This scene goes on for a long time just because the party is having a really hard time keeping track of the 5 locks, the order of them, what's written next to each of them, and what they're all saying and doing. At the risk of playing armchair quarterback about a D&D game that aired 7.5 years ago, back when there were 20 fewer MCU movies, they would have really benefited from having a handout the players could have all looked at. But with their current seating arrangement, the group is spread out between 2 different tables, and Matt was at a 3rd table, so handouts were pretty challenging to pass around and all look at. But anyway, the point is, 3 of the locks are not trapped, and are marked with some variation of the word pass through or entry in different languages. The remaining 2 locks are trapped, and they're marked with the word no in different languages. Well, they can't read one of them, but it's an educated guess. So the cast is practically begging Liam to disarm those 2 locks before trying to pick all 5 locks and open the door. After all, it makes sense that the trapped locks would have some version of do not enter marked on them, right? Liam ignores the other players and picks and unlocks the 3 untrapped locks. And then, continuing to ignore the rest of the party, he opens the door. Sure enough, the 2 trapped locks were specifically set to go off if somebody tried to tamper with them. They were false locks. They didn't even need to be touched to get through the door. So Vax successfully opened the door with no issue. I'm not going to lie, that trap totally would have taken me out, but given that this is the lair of a Thieves Guild, that trap actually does have some logic behind it. Anyone sneaking in might assume that the thieves have to pick these locks, or at least disarm the traps, in order to enter, but of course the thieves would know about that assumption and do the opposite. It's a really clever trap that is slightly undercut by the wild miscommunication at the table. The party encounters the Clasp, and Vax disrobes enough to show off his Clasp tattoo between his shoulder blades to gain an audience. They try to convince the Clasp to give up Daxio, since Uriel knows they're trying to hold him and he's an enemy of the state. Scanlan sweetens the deal by giving them a crystal blue shard from a pre-stream adventure, and lying and claiming that it grants a wish. It's not totally clear that the Clasp believes that part of it, but it is magical, and they seem satisfied with that. Vox Machina doesn't even know what it actually does, but Marisha references that they once used it to cut a hole into another dimension. So, if you're running a game in Taldore, keep in mind that the Amon faction of the Clasp has that, and according to Matt, it has a few uses. The Clasp lets Vox Machina into the hallway of cells where they're keeping Daxio safe and leaves them unattended to do as they will. So the arrangement is that Vox Machina is alone in a hallway with rows of jail cells on either side, and Daxio is in one of those cells all by himself. They crack the door, and Daxio starts attacking from inside the cell using a glaive. And thus begins what I think is the most boring fight in the history of Critical Role. Which is good they got it out of their systems this early in the show, I suppose. There's only one foe in this fight, and a bottleneck to get to him. Only a couple people can stand at the doorway and reach him. Nobody can get into the room past Daxio to flank him. Nobody can shoot into the room from far down the hall because he's too deep into the room, so they all have to clump around the door, except for Vex and Percy, who don't want to get too close, but by staying far back, they just don't get to do anything. But nobody can even get too close because he has a halberd, which has an extended range. The cast is also expecting more from him, something flashy or magical. He is an ally of the Briarwoods after all, so they're saving some of their best stuff through the first round. But he's just a Battlemaster fighter with a glaive. They also don't want to murder Daxio because they want to bring him back to Uriel alive. And the players outside the room keep trying to get him to surrender, but their intimidation checks evidently aren't enough. And here's the thing. This is absolutely a smart tactical move on Daxio's part. And we're going to talk about more monster tactics in future videos, but there are a lot of other tactical choices your monsters and villains can make that don't turn into this sort of encounter. That said, I'm not trying to pretend I'm a better GM than Matt Mercer. I've run exactly this kind of encounter countless times. It usually happens because I hadn't prepared an encounter, but this is just how that encounter shook out. But of course, that's not always the case. Sometimes you figure out what makes the most sense for the character in advance, and you think this is going to make the fight interesting and cool. But speaking from experience, putting the players into a funnel where they have to make choices is interesting and fun and cool. Putting the players into a funnel where they can't do anything is just kind of boring. So I strongly recommend you find a way to make your fight more dynamic than this. And if you're looking for advice about dynamic fights, don't worry, we have a bunch coming up in future installments of this series. Matt has some absolute bangers ahead. I also think one of the issues is that Daxio is a Battlemaster fighter, so Matt didn't give him a lot of unique abilities. He can just do what a Battlemaster fighter can do. And that's not nothing. Battlemaster fighters are great in combat, but it does limit what he can do in this sort of situation. Matt didn't give him any powers or abilities that a player couldn't have, which is a subject we'll talk about another day because I personally don't like giving villains the same abilities as players, and this fight is a great example of that approach not working. And again, it's not that Daxio's stats and the map in this encounter don't make sense for the character and for the scenario, but just because something is plausible doesn't automatically make it fun. Anyway, they're able to cast Hold Person on him long enough for Vax and Grog to get into the room, which does help. They keep trying to intimidate him to surrender, but eventually Matt tells the party that he's acting like a desperate man, and they won't be able to reason with him. He also makes a lot of his saving throws, and he gets a natural 20 to attack Keyleth, which does a butt-ton of damage. But eventually, Percy gets close enough to shoot and finishes the fight by disarming Daxio. They huck Daxio over their shoulder and leave. Scanlan tells his old friends where they can find him, and then Vox Machina starts heading towards the palace with their bounty in hand. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back soon with another episode of Critical Role Demystified. We'll be back in 2 weeks to discuss episode 38, Echoes of the Past. This episode has some excellent twists and turns, and we're also getting very, very close to one of my favorite episodes of Critical Role of all time. In the meantime, you should subscribe to this channel. I talk about D&D and other RPGs every Monday and Thursday. You can support me financially on Patreon to help make this a weekly series. You can also join my Discord server. If you're catching up with Critical Role, that is a great place to compare notes with others who are on the same journey. Make sure to follow me on Twitch to catch my live streams, and sign up for my newsletter to catch my latest news. This episode included a lot of references to the pre-stream games of the Vox Machina campaign, so make sure to check out my video where I recap those sessions and adventures and see what we can learn from them, and what we can learn about how Matt ran his home game at low levels. Until next time, play fair and have fun.